Discussion keeps the world turning.
This is Roundtable.
China's bus services need help. With rising costs and declining ridership, a new government regulation is stepping in. But can this be the fix that this system desperately needs? Coming to you live from Beijing, this is Roundtable. I'm Heyang. For today's program, I'm joined by Steve Hatherly and Guo Yan in the studio. First on today's show, public buses are the backbone of urban mobility, and China is no exception. Yet many bus companies are facing a grim future, struggling to stay afloat. With a new regulation set to take effect in December this year, local governments are being mandated to support their local bus services. But can this intervention turn the tide and reduce operational losses? Let's explore what is at stake for both passengers and public transport operators. Well, Steve, let's take a look at this regulation maybe in a little bit more detail and the background.
Yeah, this is a big story, actually, and this is from a recent Xinhua report. The State Council, which is China's cabinet, announced that the urban public transportation regulation on October 23rd, 2024 will take effect, as you mentioned, in December. It's going to be on December 1st of this year, so we are just weeks away from this regulation taking effect. The goal is to promote the high-quality development of urban public transportation, also improve its service level, ensure its safety, better meet the basic travel needs of the public, and promote the urban modernization construction. One of the highlights of the regulation, and this is according to a recent report by Sixth Tone, that's a news portal here in China, the regulation requires local authorities to take direct responsibility for managing and funding public bus services. This is what it stated. Without the consent of municipal governments, urban public transportation enterprises must not terminate services. Pretty self-explanatory, I think, in that statement, saying that the bus services, the bus companies themselves are not allowed to terminate services at all, and that if they do, they're going to need consent from their local governments.
Right, indeed. And actually, we've seen news about quite a few of the local bus services struggling here in some Chinese cities as well as around the world. But let's stay focused on China for a little longer. And could you give us a little bit more background in terms of, what gave the urgency for such a regulation to surface?
Well, such regulations, I think, come with multiple reasons. The intervention by central government follows reports of major cash flow issues at bus service operators across China. A number of companies suspended services and falling behind on paying their staff. In one of the prominent cases is that in early 2023, a bus company in Shangqiu, a small city in central China's Henan province, announced it was closing down due to severe financial problems caused by the pandemic, the adjustment of the national renewable energy subsidy policy, financial subsidy shortages, and other factors. After the news went viral, local authorities in Henan province stepped in to provide the necessary funding to allow the company to resume operations. And some similar cases have emerged in other parts of the country in the months since. According to media reports, several public bus companies in provinces, including Heilongjiang in Liaoning province and Hebei, have also suspended operations due to financial difficulties. Since early 2023, local governments had to intervene to continue the service.
Yeah, this is a big deal from the bus company's point of view, and just from a humanistic point of view, because the bus companies, that particular story that you were talking about, that bus company, they didn't have the money in their pockets, they didn't have the money in their bank account to pay the bills. And that includes paying the staff, the people who work for the bus company too. Not only those people who are employed by the bus company, but then citizens are affected as well with suspended routes. This is something that was an urgent problem that needed to be taken care of. And going back to the question of, why the urgency, why these regulations are being put in place now, because it is urgent and it is something that needs to be solved immediately.
Yes, and also a lot of these companies, they have struggled to pay bills, like you said, Steve, and some haven't paid their staff members for a couple of months, if not longer. So this is really, grinding to a scorching halt for some of these companies. And I'd like to ask you guys, considering how difficult it is for many of these bus services, why is it so important? Why is it something that is necessary to keep them afloat, operational?
Yeah, well, according again to that Sixth Tone report, Shangqu,
Shangqiu is a small city in Henan province.
Thank you for the help on the pronunciation. That city is home to 7 million residents, and that city relies heavily on its bus lines. So many people use the bus in that part of the country. 83 million people. That's the passenger volume. And actually, it was nominated as one of the top 10 bus companies by the Provincial Transportation Department going back to 2017. And they had even planned to build one bus station every 500 meters in urban areas by the year 2025, all the while maintaining their bus fee. And I think this is part of an important thing to know as well. Their bus fee at 1 yuan, that's about 14 cents per ride. Not any monthly plans or anything like that. Just if you're taking it per ride, that's what the cost of the bus is. But there we see, and that's just one example, right, from here in China. And there are plenty other examples to give of how important the bus system is. But 83 million people using the bus on an annual basis is a very important part of life, I think we can say, for a lot of people.
So the passenger volume of 83 million, so that's like 83 million trips, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it always baffles me of the size of the Chinese population, and this is, we say, a smaller city. But we've heard of Shangqiu for most Chinese people, and still, it's got 7 million residents. So a lot of people do depend on these services. Guo Yan, what do you see as, sort of the significance of having these buses available for people? I suppose for a lot of young people, especially if you go on social media, which I suppose is not news, that is more of the younger population who occupy the space and have the proverbial microphone in front of them in saying and sharing their thoughts and views on social media. You don't see people talking that much about public buses. But actually, this is a huge part of, and a vital part of the public service scope. So, do tell us, what do you think of this situation or this subject of the importance of public bus services in China?
Well, I guess that's partly due to the ever-changing landscape of China's public transportation system. And I think the market is changing because many young people tend to use ride-hailing services like the small bikes on the gate of our radio station. We have a lot of bikes. For me, if the weather is good, I would prefer to ride a bike to my destination if it's not very far away. But whenever I want to go some place, some location that is further, I would prefer to take subway line 1. That's my first choice. Yeah, in Beijing, in big cities, the subway line system is quite convenient for us too. I think that's one of the reasons why this bus service is absolutely out of the sight of the younger generation of riders and passengers. I'm not quite sure if my observation is very true, but I think that's part of the reason.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting situation and it deserves our attention. That is, you can't measure public opinion solely on what you see on social media, because a lot of the bus riders are probably older folks or people who don't have time to share what latte they had this morning, or walking their dog, those kind of things you see all over on social media. I'm not trying to diminish its influence, but it's sort of like it depends on what slice of the economy of society do you see when it comes to coming up with some kind of evaluation of how important the bus service is. And maybe it's more important than, let's say, a typical young person might think.
Well, more than the typical person, I think. Doesn't really matter how old they are. There was a report from here in the country that came out at the end of 2023, and it talked about the fact that the country had 79,800 urban public bus operating lines, and a total of 682,000 buses are under operation, and about 81% of those are new energy vehicles, which, by the way, is an amazing accomplishment. I think that's been discussed on Roundtable before. Many cities have customized bus routes for specific communities with new technologies and equipment. They've enabled intelligent transformations like real-time travel information and access and convenient mobile payment options. There was a CCTV report that revealed that the daily average passenger volume of urban public transportation is about 200 million in China. So, going green with the buses, trying to stay as modern as they can, as convenient as they can with their payment systems. I think all of that has been moving in the right direction, moving in a future direction. But as we mentioned, ride-hailing, bicycle options, there are now other affordable options for citizens of cities all over the country. And like you said, it can be something as simple as the weather. Oh, it's a nice day today. I think I'll take the bike instead of taking the bus, or it's raining. I think I'll hop on the subway as traffic's going to be worse. So I think I'll take the subway instead of taking the bus. It's very, very difficult for a bus company to stay competitive, if we can use the word competitive, in modern times when there are so many other options available.
That's a really good point. But can I just also say, because you mentioned, Steve, affordable, I still believe that public bus is the most affordable option, the cheapest option. And therefore, it is absolutely necessary to stay available, because those folks who rely on the bus system, they're not the ones who have necessarily 20 yuan to splurge on a cup of coffee. They're the ones that spend 1 yuan per trip to go to work. And it's necessary for them to have this option.
And I'm not disagreeing with anything you said, but I will say that it's hard for these bus companies to be profitable when they're charging 1 yuan, when the
even less than 1 yuan.
Or less, because even though the passenger volume is at 83 million, as we gave that one example, it still makes it a challenge for them to cover their operating costs.
And let's get into that. For a few years, we've seen this in the news, and also with the pandemic, it kind of exacerbated the dwindling ridership numbers. So why is it so hard to keep the business afloat?
Steep fall in demand, I think, for the bus service in general. Bus ridership declined by about 20 billion trips annually in recent years due to competition, like we said. But I think part of the population, the aging population, could be part of the reason as well. There's a Shanghai-based consultancy firm called Easy Traffic Consulting, and they told Sixtome that the rising aging population has exacerbated the issues. Many cities have rolled out schemes to exempt senior residents from paying for bus fares at all, meaning it's free for people in a certain age group. And that's further reduced the bus company's income. I'm not sitting here saying that that's a mistake to do that. No, they should be paying more.
That's social welfare.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying that at all. But it is reported that that's also contributing to their economic problems too.
And I don't know whether you have noticed that most of this suspension of bus services occurred in areas that are less developed in China, like like Shangqiu City, a small city in Henan province, and some small cities in northeastern China. These regions are less developed, which means that local governments there might face some financial difficulties to fund their public services, including the operation of public buses. And I think that's one of the, big reasons underlying this issue.
Yeah, essentially, this is about funding. And for a lot of public services, they rely on government funding.
Yeah.
And Steve, you have mentioned just now, more than 81% of public buses in China are fueled by green energy, which is a fantastic development. But in the past, or, ever since 2015, there have been special funding and subsidy to support the new energy initiative. But that funding is coming to an end. So therefore, we're talking about the cutting of the funding and also, with all these very practical issues that these companies are facing, that it sounds to be almost impossible.
Scaling back the subsidies for electric buses, and you're right, these bus companies are heavily reliant on government funding to begin with, just to remain solvent. Public subsidies typically account for about half, if not more than half, of their revenues. So that's part of the challenge as well. And then local governments are facing difficulties. Some local authorities have become reluctant to provide the finances to prop up these bus companies, these bus services, because they're operating at a loss, because local governments are facing budget constraints due to declining income from land sales and plenty of other factors.
Yes, and now we see that with this new regulation, which the central government has made it loud and clear that, local governments, you got to save the public, these public bus services and lines, and also you can't just terminate routes without
informing people.
Yes, and sometimes it's just you can't terminate these lines, period. And the local governments are kind of caught in a rock and a hard place. Do you have any suggestions in, how to deal with the situation?
Well, I think one of the good news is that recently I've been reporting on some economic policies by the central government. And recently this month, the central government has released, I think, around 10 trillion yuan to help local government to dissolve their debts, and which help them to support the local services. I guess the bus service is part of that. Well, it might benefit from this new policy, this new economic measures. And the newly issued central government regulation directly addresses this issue, stating that city governments are the primary entities responsible for urban public transportation in areas under their jurisdiction. The policy also requires local authorities to ensure that funding for public transportation is incorporated into their municipal budgets so that they can provide bus service operators with financial subsidies in a timely manner. I guess this kind of policies in some way urge local governments to continue to support their bus services for the public.
Urge or require them
Require.
to? Yeah, right. There's a difference.
It's a strong word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of solutions, I was having a look at different countries to see if anywhere else has dealt with this kind of situation before. And actually in Canada right now, they're going through a similar situation in the city of Edmonton, which is located in the province of Alberta on the western side of Canada. And in the city of Edmonton, they're dealing with their bus system. They're dealing with a $10 million loss. So what they're going to do is they're going to charge more. And it's a little bit more complicated than that, and I'll explain it. So they're going to charge 25 cents more. That's about 1.3 yuan more per one-time fare. And they're going to charge $1 to $2 more for monthly passes. And they charge about $70 for their monthly passes. That's about 360 yuan. So basically, they're going to charge more for a one-time fare and for their monthly passes as well. Now, they were worried that ridership might decrease because of the fare increases. They were thinking, if we charge more money, then we might alienate our customers, right? And they just won't want to take the bus anymore, or they're going to be angry about this. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to balance that with low-income families' passes. So the people, basically, it's a upon need system. So the people who are in the lower income brackets, they will not face a fare increase. Everyone else will. And then they were worried about the response there too. Okay, are people going to be upset about this? So I don't know if they surveyed the public, but the report said that the feedback that they got from citizens within the city very much supported this concept. Meaning, if you raise the fare for people who can afford it, then okay, and don't affect the fare. Don't raise the fares of people who can't afford it. So those low-income passes will remain the same price, but for everyone else, the fares will go up. That's their solution in the city, and whether it works or not remains to be seen. But yeah, they're going through the same thing. The bus system in that city is making less money than before the pandemic because many people are riding less frequently. And something interesting too that I never considered before, but they say that the pandemic had an impact on bus ridership because of hybrid working. When people started going back to work, not everyone was going back to the office. So what that means is all of those daily workers who used to take the bus every single day, a certain percentage of them are not taking the bus anymore, or at least on a part-time basis because of their work situation, and that's affecting the bus system as well.
That's a very interesting situation in America and Canada, and I read like the latest report on that is actually Uber and Lyft and those ride-hailing apps. They've actually been benefited from the hybrid work, because if this person is coming to work less often than usual, they don't take the bus, then they actually have a little bit more money to spend on per ride by ride-hailing apps. That makes sense for them. But here in China, it's a little different in the sense, of course, we're a huge country, and the bus situation could be a little bit different in, let's say, in big cities. Well, the public transportation network is usually quite robust with various options, which is great. And bus is only one of them. But let's say in cities in America, even big cities like San Francisco as such, you still need to drive. I think for most people, they feel like, unless you live in New York City, I suppose, or in Manhattan. Otherwise, having your private car, that is the primary transport mode for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But here in China, there's a rise in private car ownership, but still so many of us, we rely on public transportation, period. Yeah.
You mentioned New York City. Sorry to interrupt.
Just now you have mentioned that in Canada, some bus companies try to raise the price per trip.
In one particular city.
In one particular city. Yeah, and I think this case could also be applied in some Chinese cities. And one of the long-term solution to resolve the issue in China is that according to the new regulation, it signals a shift toward a more market-based approach, which you have mentioned, to raise price in some particularly toward a particular group of people.
Right. So basically, the elderly persons will be exempted, but for regular folks, you might need to pay a little bit more.
Right. I think shift toward a more market-based approach to funding public transportation in the long term is one of the solutions as government aims to improve efficiency and give companies greater freedom to raise revenues. And the document, for example, states that the bus companies will be allowed to provide customized transportation services at market-adjusted prices and rather than public welfare rates. I think that's what you have mentioned about the price solution.
Yeah, I remember back then a few years ago when the ticket price of public transportation I'm talking about subway sales in this city saw a spike. A lot of people were unhappy about it, but it was kind of necessary because public transportation is hugely expensive to build and to operate. And here with the buses, maybe for certain populations that could afford it, maybe this is something that, from a policy level that is being contemplated. But all in all, public transportation is so good. It reduces our carbon footprint, carbon emissions, and it's such convenience for the wider population of all segments.